Welcome to Philosophy 3400, Ethics. Today I'm going to be reading passages from and analyzing, explicating Aristotle's Rhetoric, Book 1, Chapter 5. As we can see from the very beginning of the reading, the topic here is happiness, as Aristotle puts it. I want us to be very clear from the beginning here that what is being translated here is happiness. In Aristotle is the Greek term eudaimonia. And one thing it does not mean is, for Aristotle at least, is a pleasant feeling inside of us that is transitory. This is, I think, the standard, this is the maybe most prevalent, widespread sense of happiness in English today, right? Are you feeling happy? Do you have a feeling, a pleasurable feeling, a feeling of mild euphoria or something like this? You feel good? Are you feeling positive feelings at this moment? If so, we often characterize it as happiness. Happiness for Aristotle, eudaimonia, is going to be a little bit more complicated and more interesting, frankly, than some sort of passing feeling of pleasant sensations. So we'll get around to understanding what Aristotle means by happiness, particularly in the Ethics, particularly in Book 1. However, let's just proceed here with Aristotle. Every individual man, and he means here, I believe, human being, if I were to look at the Greek here, anthropos, not aner. So all human beings aim at a certain end, Aristotle says, which determines what they choose and what they avoid. So when you look around, you see people doing stuff. And why are they doing things? Well, because they are aiming, Aristotle claims, at a certain end. And based on the end that they are aiming at, the goal, the telos in Greek, this goal then determines what is chosen, what is avoided by people. This end, to sum it up briefly, is happiness and its constituents. So this is what I want us to think about today, are the constituents, as Aristotle puts it here, of happiness. He's going to articulate these, enumerate them in just a moment. So, this is the proposal Aristotle makes here. This is the task for us today, is to understand, right, what in general is the nature of happiness and what are the elements of its constituent parts. So what is happiness in its general nature? What are the constituent parts of happiness? This is what Aristotle wants to talk about here. So let's have a look. If you look at the next paragraph, the very bottom of the first page of this handout, this excerpt from Aristotle's Rhetoric, we may define happiness as prosperity combined with virtue. So there's one definition. We can also define happiness as independence of life, or as the secure enjoyment of the maximum of pleasure. So here's something like these positive feelings, this feeling of pleasantness in our bodies, these good feelings we sometimes have that kind of come and go, has a place here as a potential definition of happiness, or as a good condition of property and body, right? A healthy body and wealth, health and wealth, together with the power of guarding one's property and body and making use of them. That happiness is one or more of these things pretty well, everyone agrees. So this paragraph here contains, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 possible definitions of happiness. Where is Aristotle getting these definitions? These are popular definitions in his time, or these are definitions that have been advanced by a particular philosopher, poet, or sage. So, one contender, prosperity combined with virtue. Another contender for happiness, independence of life. Secure enjoyment of the maximum of pleasure sounds what we would characterize as hedonism today. And it could correlate with a school of ancient hedonism, though I'm used to hedonists in antiquity putting this in negative terms, right? Avoidance of all unnecessary pain in a sense. In any case, another definition here, a good condition of property and body, health and wealth, basically, along with the ability to maintain one's wealth and to maintain one's health and to make use of them. So not merely having wealth, but being able to use it effectively and properly and well. Exemplifying, for instance, a virtue such as generosity becomes important, as well as health, right? Not merely being healthy, but being able to make use of one's health to do wonderful and graceful things with your body, for example, with your healthy body, or courageous actions. Okay, now from this definition, it's kind of a composite, it's several definitions. From this definition of happiness, Aristotle goes on, it follows that its constituent parts are, and we have to pay close attention, these are what are often thought of by Aristotelians in this tradition as external goods. They are essential, well, they are necessary. How about that? They are necessary for happiness, although they actually, in the final analysis, they're not going to be essential. That is, for instance, you don't necessarily need all of these things to hold true to qualify as happy. Thankfully, because when you look at this list, it's going to be, it should be fairly familiar, many of these constituent parts. Even today, many people, when they think of happiness for themselves and for others and in general, often, without even remarking on it, will include many of these things in their conception of happiness. Good birth. This is a tricky one to put into contemporary terms, but the idea is something like being born into a healthy, well-respected family of means, with wealth of some kind too. Good birth. You're born healthy. You're born into a family where people care about you. Your family is noted in its community and makes a contribution that people respect. Right? You're from a respectable family in some sense. Good birth. Plenty of friends. Plenty of friends. So having many friends. But then if you look after this, good friends. These are two different things for Aristotle and for all of us, frankly, right? It's one thing to have many friends. It's another thing to have good friends. Wealth, or what is referred to as prosperity, but wealth. Good children, plenty of children. Same thing with friends, right? Good children, plenty of children. Not necessarily the same thing. A happy old age. There's a criterion that, until we've reached old age, we're not ever going to be sure we've checked that box. This is something that's going to come up later in the ethics. So a happy old age, bodily excellences such as health, beauty, strength, large stature. So now we have ableism essentially built into Aristotle's ethics here. Athletic powers, together with fame, honor, good luck, and virtue. Well, the idea here is all of these parts together, these would be something like boxes that if you were able to sort of check every box that you would like to check in your sort of life's trajectory here, you would check these boxes. Aristotle believes. His colleagues, his contemporaries believe this. They take this for granted, that all of these things unquestionably form parts of happiness. We could question a number of these criteria today. People do, right? They question criteria such as what is called beauty, what is called strength, large stature, athletic powers. Must one really have athletic powers to be a fulfilled human being? Is it possible to live a fulfilling life with a disability, for example? These are questions people ask today, and they rightly question whether there isn't a kind of ableism, as it's known, built into ethical approaches like Aristotle's here. In any case, for Aristotle, the idea is when you conceive of the good life and of happiness, there are a number of different aspects and elements to what you're talking about. And these constituent parts form something like the recipe, the ingredients that go into this recipe. They are not the meal itself. They're not happiness itself, right? You can have all of these things and not be happy. And this is where, if we pay attention a little bit above, making use of the things you have well, excellently, properly is essential to happiness. So what would it matter if you had good birth, plenty of friends, good friends, wealth, plenty of children, good children, happy old age, health, beauty, strength, large stature, athletic powers, fame, honor, good luck, and virtue? What would it matter if you had all of that, but were, for some reason, utterly incapacitated? Aristotle will ask. In a coma, on a deserted island, removed from all human beings. None of these things would matter if you can't actually do something with them or on their basis. Now, Aristotle believes if you have all these constituent parts of happiness, you cannot fail to be completely independent, as he puts it. And that means you will not rely, once you have these things, once you have them, you will not need to rely on others for anything more. That's the idea. These are classed by Aristotle as internal and external goods, and he says here on the second page of the handout that these are all the goods there are. Okay, in any case, I want us to just think, these are the constituents, right? We want to be, when we think of happiness, of fulfillment, of realizing our full potential, these sorts of constituent parts or ingredients are often taken for granted. You come from a good home. You don't come from a broken home. Why not? Right? Because all the adversity and misfortune and suffering that can traumatize you, that can lead to complications, let's put it, for your mental health and for your well-being. So, right, that's the idea, right? Plenty of friends and good friends, as opposed to, very few friends who are not very good. This is a possibility as well, right? We can end up not having many friends, and the few we have, not very good ones, right? In which case, it's hard to imagine someone who has few friends and whose few friends are not trustworthy. It's hard to imagine that person living a fulfilling life, right? Wealth, good children, plenty of children. We could talk about these more. They're fairly conventional, and I think Aristotle's approach is to start with a fairly conventional view of happiness. He just wants to basically articulate it as clearly as possible and try to understand what is reasonable in this approach. And so here, strictly speaking, this is actually not Aristotle's account of happiness, frankly. This is the account that he's receiving from his culture at this time. And he thinks that this traditional view of happiness, frankly, is not entirely wrong and is worth thinking about. And that ultimately, when he does articulate his conception of happiness in the Ethics, he's going to build on some of these elements and aspects, but he's going to have a little bit more to say here than it's really nice to have all of these things in your life, and if you don't have them, you're not happy. He's going to have something more to say than just that. Now, one complication worth looking at here on the second page. We think that a person, Aristotle says, should possess resources and luck in order to make life secure. So he even adds luck or fortune to the recipe for happiness. That's another thing, kind of like good birth, right? And I think that's why his discussion of good birth here segues, along with money, segues into this point about luck or fortune. These are things we are not in control of, right? You don't choose what family you are born into as a child. You also don't choose, whether or not your family is wealthy. And even if you're wealthy at any given moment, you're not in control of whether or not you remain wealthy. Whatever billionaires and inquisitive folks might tell you, right, there's this little phenomenon known as the market. There's also human history. Fortunes are won and lost, sometimes overnight, right? And so even wealth, even your possession of wealth is often thought of by the ancients, at least, as something that's utterly susceptible to fortune and to sudden change from, and this can be good or bad. This can mean that you suddenly go from poverty to wealth or from wealth to poverty. In any case, there's a fundamental instability and unpredictability at work here. All right, so Aristotle then says, look, we've ascertained what happiness in general is now. Let's try to ascertain what these parts of it are. So now he's going to go through and he's going to articulate each of these ingredients, these elements of happiness, these constituent parts. Good birth. He's going to give you this, the Greek version of this. And here, we could think of this. Okay, this is a traditional conception of ethnicity, frankly. And so there's actually a sort of moment here that, if we're not careful, can be characterized as a kind of racism, right? So good birth in a race or state means its members are indigenous or ancient. In other words, you are fully a member of some tribe. And if you're not, if you don't have pure blood in some sense, right, you now do not have good birth. For Athenians, in the generations just prior to Aristotle, in Socrates' time, for example, if you did not have two parents born in Athens or born in Attica, the region that Athens belongs to, you were not a citizen. You had to have two parents who were born in the state that you're born in. If one of your parents was deemed a foreigner, you were denied citizenship. This is, I think, at work and at play here in this conception of good birth. And so I want us to be much more critical of this conception. This does not pass muster in the 21st century, and it comes off, fairly questionable, in my view. It just seems kind of irrelevant these days. Indigenous or ancient. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't choose this. I think that's true, and there are folks who have this kind of birth, right? They are members of some tribe. They are members of some ethnic group. They are entirely, for example, descended from some group, right? Others have, as many different sort of ethnic components as there are colors in the rainbow. And it's no longer obvious, clear, or even, I think, reasonable to make too much of this kind of a distinction, especially when we now know that pretty much all human beings share common ancestors that originated in Africa or originated simultaneously, maybe in several parts of the globe. And so ultimately, many of these questions about birth and ethnicity are social constructs, really, rather than natural data. The good birth of an individual, he goes on, right, both parents are free citizens. Now we have not merely a racial component, but the class component, right? So now even within some tribe, some ethnos, some people, there can also, not merely on the basis of, whether you are from here or have some parent from somewhere else, there can also be designations of whether or not you are free, whether you are unfree, a slave, a servant of some kind at this time in the society. Possession of good children, many children, as Aristotle says, have a clear meaning. Okay, so let's not even trouble ourselves too much over these. But I want to look at some of the other comments he makes here at the bottom of the second page of the handout. Applied to a community, phrases such as possession of good children or of many children mean that its young men are numerous. And here I think he is probably using the gendered term men, probably. And he's probably thinking of something like your the material for your armed forces, in a sense, the resources for your military. Applied to a community, and for athletics. Applied to a community, they mean that its young men are numerous and of good equality. Good in regard to bodily excellences, such as stature, beauty, strength. All right, so where were we? Anyways, here we are with all these bodily excellences. That, if you look at Greek sculpture from the classical period, if you think about the origin of what we call the Olympic Games, but included a sort of circuit of various regional games throughout the known Greek world at this time, you understand that sort of bodily excellence was taken very seriously by the Greeks, right? Having a sort of classically beautiful physique was much esteemed. But Aristotle makes it clear that he's not simply talking about, when he talks about good children, he's not just talking about, physical excellence, he's also talking about intellectual or mental excellence, right, as he puts it, which in a young man are temperance and courage. So not eating and drinking to excess, being able to withstand danger and run risks for the sake of the good, freedom of your community or something like this. So we can go through and we can look at these in detail. I think many of these are going to be somewhat intuitive, fairly easy to understand. There are some weird moments, and let's not get too hung up on them, but at the top of page 3, for example, Aristotle claims communities as well as individuals should lack none of these perfections, right? Bodily and intellectual or mental or of the soul. He says, in their women as well as in their men. And now he says, whereas among the Lacedaemonians the state of women is bad, almost half of human life is spoiled. It's, to me, not really clear what he means there. The state of women is bad in Lacedaemonia. I mean, frankly, recent scholarship suggests that it's, the converse here. The state of women was bad in Athens. Women were essentially locked in rooms by their husbands and had their activity very much restricted in Athens. Whereas in Sparta, Lacedaemonia, Sparta the city, Lacedaemonia the region, here women had a kind of equality with men and were able to do many of the same jobs that men were able to do. So, not exactly sure what he's getting at here with his dig at Sparta. The constituents of wealth. Do we really need to go through this? It's going to, but there are some important differences here. I think the main difference here with the constituents of wealth on page 3 is wealth in antiquity had more to do with owning property, including living human beings, and less to do with the actual ownership and possession of currency. He does mention coin money, right? But look, it's just one item on a list. And of course, right, another moment here where we might want to say, well, okay, Aristotle, in your time, with your culture, slavery was traditional. Why should we, or why should anybody who doesn't live in your time and isn't part of your group here, community, accept this kind of institution of slavery as somehow natural or as normal in some sense? Something to keep in mind. Now, the important point here for wealth is, as he puts it at the bottom of this paragraph, right? Wealth as a whole consists in using things rather than owning them. It is really the activity, right? The use of property that constitutes wealth. Wealth that you cannot use isn't really wealth to Aristotle, okay? And, it's also true that virtue, for example, with Aristotle, that you don't put into use is worthless, right? And there's a famous line from the Ethics where he says, we don't give the gold medal at the Olympics. I mean, it's not the gold medal in antiquity, but kind of switching between ancient and modern times here. We don't give the gold medal at the Olympics to, in wrestling or something, to the biggest and strongest looking person in the audience. Right? You can have a very powerful physique, more powerful than the people in the ring, for example, right? But you have to get in the ring and wrestle to win a medal. And Aristotle thinks that's true for virtue and for wealth. You have to use it, you have to do something with it and make it real in that sense. Take it out of the realm of possibility and potential and make it actual and real. Otherwise, you may as well not have it at all. Whatever it is, wealth or virtue. All right, so we'll skip fame and honor here. Not that interesting, ultimately, because ultimately, right, honor and fame are fickle. They're often attributed to people unreasonably. Communities, audiences will sometimes honor and celebrate the wrong person. As any athlete knows, right? Any athlete who's been passed over for an MVP award, or any athlete that deserved some kind of recognition but didn't receive it, someone else received. I guess my example here would be something like, is it the Pro Bowl? Or maybe I'm thinking of the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. In any case, there are these honors that professional athletes receive based on popularity. And so fans vote, right? And what this leads to then are, the teams that have the largest fan bases and the fans who vote the most end up being overrepresented. And so really good players who have actually done better than their rivals are passed over if they come from a smaller metro area like Buffalo, New York, or Tampa, or something like this. But if you come from a city like New York or LA or Chicago, there's going to be a lot of fans. And so what this leads then to, right, is people being honored and receiving honors, but not necessarily meriting it all the time. So for these reasons, even if we say fame and honor belong to happiness, we also have to recognize that we mean this maybe in a longer term sense, right? It's often the case that hindsight is 20/20, and that people over time realize who deserves the honors, but in the moment, this is not always clear. Another example would be sort of these awards every year for the best film by the Academy here down the road in Hollywood, right? Films will be deemed best picture of the year. Well, 20 years later, that film might be regarded as mediocre, might even be regarded as garbage. Some other film that year that wasn't particularly popular, belatedly, years later, is recognized as way ahead of its time and the best film of that year or something, right? So, we'll skip over some of the other stuff, but I want to look at the comments on old age, and then we'll end for today. Happiness and old age. This is the very bottom, page 4, leading on to the last page of this PDF. Happiness in old age is the coming of old age. So this is important for Aristotle because, life is a whole that takes place over time. It's like a story, a song, like any meaningful whole composed of parts. And it has, for Aristotle, like a story, a narrative, a beginning, a middle, an end, or it needs to be its best. And so old age, it belongs to happiness. Living to old age and having a happy old age is important. Why? Because, well, here's another popular view. People can be happy in their primes and in the moment or something like this. But everybody gets old and becomes ill in some sense and becomes miserable. And so there might be this conception, there is a popular conception, right? Live for today, live for the present moment. You have no idea what comes next, but you can expect something bad down the road, right? Well, that view is pretty fatalistic and resigns us to essentially being miserable in old age. We're going to basically rot somewhere and be neglected by people, and our own family and friends are either going to die off or begin to ignore us. We're going to become a burden on other folks, etc. All the terrible things that can happen in old age that people fear. So, if we're going to conceive of what a fulfilling life looks like, we're going to imagine then old age going well. And what would that look like, Aristotle? Explains that it would look as follows, right? The coming of old age slowly and painlessly. You hardly notice it coming on, and it doesn't come with terrible pains. For a man has not this happiness if he grows old either quickly. I mean, how, I'm not exactly sure, but there can be tremendous adversity that strikes people and does make them grow old, in a sense, quickly. Or growing old tardily but painfully, right? So in other words, maybe chronic, serious pain, uh, makes it feel as though each day is agonizing. And so, um, old age proceeds slowly and painfully if you have a really debilitating, painful condition, especially 2,500 years ago or so. It arises both from the excellences of the body, health and stature and strength and whatnot, and from good luck, right? So here's again, having your old age turn out well is going to depend on your health, for instance, and the things you're doing, like exercise and diet, but it's also going to depend on good luck, something that's not entirely in our control. If a man is not free from disease, or if he is strong, he will not be free from suffering, right? And so suffering is going to be a part of our lives, but we can respond to it better or worse, nor can he continue to live a long and painless life unless he has good luck. So good luck is sort of what keeps us from experiencing the worst misfortunes. There is indeed, and the worst sort of illnesses. There is indeed a capacity for long life that is quite independent of health or strength. For many people live long who lack the excellences of the body. And here, it's not exactly sure. I think what Aristotle's getting at here is, we want to correlate things like health and strength with longevity, living a long life. But what we notice is there are people like Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, who the guitarist of this rock band from way back in the 1960s. He's still alive. He lived a very unhealthy life. He was a rock star. He drank to excess and used a lot of serious drugs. But yet here he is in old age. He's about 80 years old today, still able to play a guitar on the stage. He's had to cut back on the drinking. But there's an example, right? Shouldn't that person not have made it so long? Shouldn't somebody who, is a vegetarian and avoids alcohol, shouldn't they be living into their 80s and 90s? And it just doesn't always work out that way. And that's where luck essentially is coming into play. So let's look at luck here. All such good things, he says, as excite envy. So the good things in life, these external goods that are not up to us all the time to control, we can do things when it comes to health and strength. We can exercise, we can lift weights. But can we do things when it comes to our stature? I'm 6 feet tall, I'm not going to get any taller. That's my stature, right? So there's kind of a line here between the things we have control of, things we don't have control of. Luck is a general term for everything that is not under our control. So luck, he says, is also the cause of good things now. And I want us to remember, it's not always that we have to fear bad things happening to us. Luck is also the cause of good things that happen contrary to reasonable expectation. Okay? You go to the gas station and you spend $1 to play a scratch-off lottery ticket, and you should lose. That's what pretty much happens nearly all the time. However, every once in a while, something good happens. I think. I don't play scratch-off lottery tickets, and I'm not sure I ever won 25 years ago when I did play a few. But in any case, the idea is, you should, if you're at the casino playing the slot machine, if you're at the gas station buying a scratch-off lottery ticket, the reasonable expectation is that you're going to lose and that you've wasted your money. However, every once in a while, something happens contrary to reasonable expectation. You win. Or Aristotle's example. I like his example even better. Huh? When all your brothers are ugly, but you are handsome yourself. I wonder who he's thinking of there. Or when you find a treasure that everyone else has overlooked. Or when a missile hits the next man and misses you. Or when you are the only man not to go to a place you have gone to regularly, while the others go there for the first time and are killed. Boy, some gruesome and grim examples, but I think it's still fascinating here to reflect on what what we're calling luck or fortune here, and how it can unreasonably improve the goods that are present in our lives, and can also unreasonably um, affect us adversely as well through no fault of our own, right? Like this situation where a missile hits the next man and misses you, right? Well, what if the missile hits you and misses the next man? Now it's bad luck. So you can just reverse any one of these situations. All your brothers are handsome, but you're the ugly one. Now it's, it's still luck. Now it's the cause of a bad thing that happened contrary to reasonable expectation. All my brothers, they were all really handsome. We had every, my family had every expectation that I was going to be born handsome too, and it didn't work out that way. So anyways, here we go. Whether we want to call this good luck or bad luck, I mean, the general term luck or fortune in Greek can mean good or bad luck depending on context. And I think these examples here, sometimes Aristotle is going to overly emphasize good fortune, good luck, and I think we always want to pay attention as well to bad fortune, bad luck, misfortune as well. Okay, I think that's good enough to get sort of just some of these ingredients of happiness on the table. We're going to really come back to many of these elements of happiness, this theme, this topic of what happiness is, how much of our happiness is up to us, how much of it is outside of our control. All of this we're going to spend, weeks on when we look at Aristotle's Ethics in a few weeks. So this is really just an introduction to some of these themes today. Thank you for joining me.